Hi everyone, welcome back. In the next stage of our project we're going to move on to texturing. So basically what we need to do is create some texture maps in Photoshop. These are just image files, and we then also need to import those texture files once we've created them back into Maya and apply them into a material shader which gets applied onto our models. So you can see here I've got a couple of sample images that I've just quickly built up. Now the one on the left here is for the can template, and the one over here on the right is for the bottle template. Now what I'm going to do in this video is basically just quickly sort of run through the basic process, and this process you can use for either the bottle or the can. So I'm not going to be doing in particular a separate video for both of the objects for the main label. The techniques are exactly the same for both projects. I will later on split into two separate video streams where the texturing becomes a little bit different for both objects. So what we need to do first of all is open up our templates that we exported in the last section of our project. So those are going to be in the images folder just here in our project folder. So you can see here this is the bottle project, and this is the template for the bottle that we exported last time. So if you're working on your bottle, that's the file that you open. Likewise for the can, once again in the images folder inside the project folder just here, you'll have a template that looks something along these lines. So that would be the file that you would be opening in Photoshop. So I should probably open it in Photoshop. Bear with me for a second. Oops. I'm just going to undock these as floating panels. Okay, there we go. Right, so now I can minimize these. Alright, so basically what we do is we get those images, whichever image you're working on in Photoshop, just open those up like that. So like I said, I'm going to kind of do little bits on both of these. I'll probably work on the can predominantly because the actual label is bigger, the area is bigger, but the process is exactly the same. Alright, so first thing I like to do is I generally set my interface up so I've got the navigator open like this, and the swatch panel and the layer panel, and you'll get those panels under the window menu just here. So we've got layers, navigator, swatches. The other one I like to have open is character section just here, and I've got that currently sort of added as a little button just here. So this is the character section. Sometimes as well I might have the path panel open, but at the moment I'm not going to need this just yet. Probably later when we're doing the bump map image. So those are the panels I like to have when I'm working, and you can see here I keep my interface kind of neat and tidy. You'll find that probably at school there'll be panels everywhere, especially where you're sharing a computer with another student. Sometimes you might be the messy student that's constantly kind of leaving files all over the desktop, and maybe panels from your software all over the place, or you might have someone that uses the same computer as you that is the messy one and kind of craps the whole thing up for you. So basically you always try and keep your interface nice and clean. You can actually reset the interface if you come up to the little button up here. Yeah, you can come down and hit the reset button, and this will say whichever reset it is. Usually it's normally essentials, so this would normally say reset essentials, but I've created my own new workspace with my setup. And so that's what I'm currently using, and that's why it says Reset Simon 001. That's my own personal one that I've done, which is this layout that you see here. Alright, so let's get into this. So the first thing I want to do, and this is for either file, is I want to rename layer 0. Layer 0 is the actual template layer with the wires, the line work from that template. And what I usually do is just double click the label there, and I usually just call this OL, and that's short for outline, and that's just a term that I use. It's certainly not a standard or anything. That's just the way I tend to name it. primarily because it's a lot quicker than typing in template. And I generally lock that. Now I might unlock it from time to time just to make adjustments, but usually what I'll do is lock that so I don't end up accidentally moving it, which is really important to not move that template at all. And also so I don't accidentally draw on that layer as well. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is create a new layer. And we just press the new layer button down here in the layer panel. Now if you want, you can go up to layers, new layer, but you can see there that's a few different mouse moves. It's easier just to hit the button. And that'll be called layer 1. And usually what I'll do is rename that BG, which is background. Now this tends to be generally a temporary layer. I tend not to, this may not actually end up kind of visible later on. And what you can do is just kind of fill that. I tend to fill it with a dark color, maybe black, something like that. And that's so I can see the lines. So if you grab like black out of your swatches, and then you can come up here to the gradient or paint bucket tool. One of those will be visible. What you want is the paint bucket, and then just fill that color in. Now you can see here the background layer is above the outline layer, so what I need to do is drag background under outline, and then you'll see your lines pop up like that. Okay, so generally speaking, what you would do is do the exact same thing if you were working on the bottle. Alright, so all of these steps basically you do for either one. Alright. Okay, so now what we need to do is basically work out what we're going to do with the label. I'm going to start off with a color map, and that's predominantly going to be the label for the can, because it's probably the it's the most involved bit, and it's really this is the section that's really up to you. So what you'll need to do is come up with an idea for a can label. Okay, now it can be kind of based on a real world drink or something like that. It could be something that's not even food related or drink related. Okay, it could be something, you know, completely ridiculous, like, you know, like a pet chihuahua in a can or something like that. So you might find a picture of a chihuahua. So, you know, you can be as ridiculous and out there as you want with this, or you can kind of do it kind of like very straight-laced and maybe do an existing product and kind of redesign a label for that. Whatever you choose to do, what you'll need to do is find a whole bunch of images for that theme, or create the images yourself. Okay, so they could be drawings, photographs, you know, labels, those kind of things. So what I've done, just for this little example, I've gone online and basically grabbed just a couple of images off a quick Google search. So I haven't created these images myself. Literally, I just did a really fast Google search just to have a couple of images I could show you guys some techniques with. So I'm going to do a Minecraft based label, as you saw before in those samples, and I'm just going to pop those open in Photoshop as well. So I'm going to use these images in conjunction with some stuff I'm going to produce directly in Photoshop to build up a label. So to get these pictures into your document, what you do is, if you've got them open in Photoshop, what you do is you come across to the layer panel just here, and you drag the layer for the image into your document window like this. You can see it's getting this black outline on it. Okay, you just drop it in there, and it will add it as a new layer inside your working file. So I'm just going to do that for both of those pictures, like that. Now what this is doing is actually rasterizing the image directly into the file. Okay, and a different way of doing it, which is a slightly different, there's a subtle difference. If I get the file from my folder and I drag that directly into the document window, you can see that it's got this little plus. When I drag that in, you can see here that what it's doing is actually shrinking it, and if I press enter after doing that, it loads it in, so you can see that there it's a different layer, and you can see it's got this little icon in it. What that is a smart object layer. Alright, so if it's already open in Photoshop and you drag it in, it's just a regular layer, and you can see that it comes in at its actual full size. If you drag it in directly as an image directly as a file from the folder, it brings it in as a smart object. So there's a subtle difference between the two. Okay. Now, for me, I think it's probably going to work better as the full-sized image for the time being, only because, especially with this background image, it's really huge. But what I can do is just turn those two layers off there, and I'll just hide them down underneath the background just to get them out of the way. Really, you can do it either way, it's not going to matter. Okay, so what I want to do first of all is get my background color or image to fill up the label area. Now, with a picture as a background like this, if it's a picture that's going to cover the whole thing, then what I do is I come up to, let's see, I'll go up to the move tool just here, and I've got my layer selected. You can see I can move that around. What I need to do is get this picture to fit this top section of the template where the label is, this area. So you have a couple of options here. If the picture's not as big as this, so you can see here that if I turn on the show control, you can see I get this bounding box around it. Basically what I can do is holding shift down and the alt key, I can click and drag on a corner, and that shrinks the layer down from the center like this. So I can do that and then position it over the top of the label area like this, and just kind of adjust it until it's the size that I want. Now keep in mind with this image, I can't really go any narrower than that, because basically there'll be gaps that I'll have to then fill up, probably duplicating sections of the image and using them to fill the gaps in. All right, so I'm just going to go to that big. Now the other option, if you don't want to use a picture and you just want a blank kind of cut, or just a flat color that you create, the other way of doing it is to use a new layer and a marquee selection at the top, just here, and just drag a box around your label area on the template like this. Now what I'm doing here, I'll just press F and go full screen for a second, and I'll zoom in. What I'm doing here with this selection, I'm going slightly outside the template, so there's a little bit of overlap, and what that'll do is stop black lines appearing on your model. So you have to make sure that you overlap the colors just slightly outside the template, just to stop there being gaps in your textures. Oops. So what I can do, if I just wanted a color rather than this this picture, what I can do is select the paint bucket tool, my color, I've got my selection, and I've got a new layer which I've just created by clicking this button, and I can just fill that in. So that would give me just a flat color. Okay. Likewise, you could use the gradient tool. So if I go gradient tool just here, you can see here it's selecting the two colors and putting them in a gradient up here. So I could basically hold shift and drag down like this and get a gradient across my can to get the color blending from one color to another. Okay. And the longer you make the line when you drag the gradient, the more gradual the change is. If you do a very short line, the gradient becomes very sharp. Okay. If you click the gradient swatch, you can make edits to the gradient in here. You can add extra colors in. You can adjust them up and down and so on. Okay. So you can do all that kind of thing as well. So it's up to you how you want to make a background color. Just going to go with a picture background for myself. Okay, so if you've got other elements like other pictures and so on, I've got this this Minecraft label, so you can position that as well. I'm going to drag this layer up above the background. So I've got this Minecraft label here. I'll turn on my transform controls, and I'm holding down the space bar to get this little hand, and I can drag around the document like this when it's in full screen mode. Holding shift, I'm just going to scale that down like that, and if I move my cursor outside a corner of the transform controls, it turns into a little kind of bendy arrow. If I hold down shift and then click and drag, I can rotate the layer around like this and it snaps to like 15-degree increments. So I can rotate this around until it's 90 degrees, and then position it sort of down here like this, and then holding shift I can kind of scale it down to fit the side of the can again. Now if you drag here, you can see there it basically stretches the image. Alright, I'd probably try and avoid that where possible unless it's the effect that you want. Okay, you know, so I might do something like that, and then just press enter to lock that change in. You can turn the transform controls off as well. I tend to leave these off when I'm not using it, primarily because they sometimes get in the way. Sometimes you might accidentally drag on a corner or something and rescale something or rotate something when you didn't mean to. With them off, I can just click and drag anywhere and just move that layer around without worrying about kind of bending it or doing something weird to it. So you can see there, basically, I'm starting to get sort of what's starting to look like an actual label now. So the next thing I might do is add some text in Photoshop. So I'm going to turn the text tool on just here, and I've got a color already. I've got this yellow color. I can select the color from over here. You know, so usually what I do is use this to get roughly the color I want. So like if I might go like a yellow, like that, and then if I click here, I go into the color picker, and then I can kind of adjust. So I can change the tone or the hue just down here, and then I can adjust how much, like sort of what the opacity or the, sorry, I should say the brightness level or the saturation level is in here. You know, so I might go something like that. And then with the text, I'm going to just type something out. Now, a little note with the text tool. Usually I like using the character panel more than using the text tool settings up here, only because every time you move your cursor sort of right to the very edges of your interface, it tends to slow you down because you're having to move much further off your work area. So I like having this little panel that just pops out here, and I can select the text. Now, the problem with this text panel, and it's sort of similar in Illustrator as well, is that the sample it gives you here is just way too small. Some of these fonts, especially like the cursive scripts and so on, the handwriting scripts, they're virtually impossible to see. So I tend not to use this. What I do, on the PC, I've actually got a font viewer installed on my system where it allows me to basically have a list of all the fonts that I have installed on my computer. This is the AMP font viewer, or the AMP font viewer. This button down here pops this list up, and I can scroll through and actually set the size of the sample that I want. So if I want like 36 sample, I can set that, and now I can see clearly what the fonts look like. And all I do is have a look at the font name. So just there, you know, like this one's called Addict, for example, and then I can just search for that in the Photoshop panel. Okay, so for me, I'm looking for a font that the font that I'm going to use kind of matches the Minecraft theme, and this one's called Context. And once again, it was a font that I found on the internet. There's tons of font sites you can go onto and find out fonts. So I'm just going to type in some text here. So I'll just pop my cursor down there, and I'll just type in. So this is kind of like a creeper, Minecraft creeper. So my little tagline is going to be "Makes your face explode," and then a exclamation mark. And what I might do is pop and just hit enter there in the middle, just so I get kind of 2 lines of text. So then what I can do is pop back up to my move tool, and I can adjust this. Now, because this is actually text and it's not rasterized, it hasn't been kind of converted into pixels, basically I can adjust this as much as I want, and it won't actually degrade the image quality of the text. So if I turn Show Transform tools on, I can scale this up, and you can see when I lock it in, the quality of the text is as good as it was when it was small. It hasn't pixelated or kind of blurred or anything. So I can kind of adjust it like that, as long as it's a text layer. Okay, so I'm going to pop that about there. Maybe rotate this around a little bit. I might actually make this a bit bigger. So I want this sort of across most of the can. like that. So I just press enter and turn off the transform controls. Now to make that text stand out a little bit more, I want to kind of add a bit of depth. So I'm going to double click over here in an empty spot on this layer entry just here in the layer panel. And that'll bring up my layer styles. And I'm just going to turn on drop shadow just here. I'll just click it and it'll tick. And you can see here it's added this shadow underneath. And you can play around with the different settings, but usually what I'll do is turn off global light and then kind of adjust the angle to how I want it. So that'll be fine. Now a little side note on those layer styles. If you right click on the layer with a layer style on, you can hit copy layer style. And then if you go over to another layer that you want to add the same style to, you can right click on that new layer and hit paste layer style. So you can see there what I've done is copied the shadow from the text here and pasted it onto this logo label over here. So it's now got the same style of shadow. Okay, you can turn the effects off just here by poking the little eye button like that as well, and that turns the effect on and off for that layer. And you can hide the effects drop down by clicking the little N buttons over here. So basically you continue that process until you've got all the pieces of your label the way that you want them. Okay, and it's exactly the same for the bottle. Alright, so just keep in mind, identify the area of the template that your label takes up, and that's where you position all of your label sections. Now what you need to do is make sure that parts of your label, any of those layers you've created, don't overlap other parts of the model on the template. So we can see down here that this green background is overlapping with this strip of polygons. Now this strip of polygons needs to be silver on the model, and at the moment that what will happen is, because the green is covering them, they'll actually come out green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask out the background color, this green. I'm going to mask it out so it doesn't cover that section of the template. So I'm going to select all of the layers that make up my label. So it's basically this text layer, this icon layer, and then the background like this. And I'm going to come up to layer, group layers. There it is there, group layers, which is Control G or Command G, and that'll put them in a folder, which you can see there. So then what I can do is put a layer mask on this group here. So I'm just going to rename this first. I'm just going to call this label. And then if I come down to the layer mask button at the bottom, turn that on, it adds a layer mask. Just make sure that's active by clicking it. And then what we'll do is you can use either the rectangular marquee tool, and in this situation that's what I'm going to use. But for odd random shapes, you can also use the polygonal lasso tool just here. That's usually a good one as well. For this, I'm going to use the marquee tool. And what I'm doing is I'm starting just outside the label area, and I'm going to drag a selection around, sort of through the bottom of the little lip section of the template like this. So basically I've got all of that extra green that I don't want selected within this area. Then what I do is I use the paint bucket tool like this and make sure my color is black, and then I just fill that area. And what it'll do is it'll hide any of this label layer or group that's inside the selection. And then you can just deselect that. So just go select, deselect, which is Control D or Command D. So that's kind of my label. All right. Now, obviously, you guys go to town, add in like a list of ingredients using the text tool. You can maybe draw in a barcode using the line tool just here. Just go crazy with it. Do as much as you want. Okay, and it's exactly the same for the bottle. Okay, but in my case, with the bottle label, the label is actually at the bottom section, just down here. So I've just dropped in a black layer there so you can see it. So basically, for me, for the bottle, the label is down here. So all those things that I've just done in the can, what I would do is do the exact same things in here. Okay, same process, and just make sure none of the can layers, any of the label layers overlapping any of the other parts of the template. Alright, so I'm going to leave this here. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the bottle layer just here, and I'm going to run through adding just little labels and things. Predominantly what I'm going to do is look at the just selecting areas of color for the cap. What we need to do is kind of set colors for those. So with that said, I'm going to leave this here, and I will see you in the next part.